Dad, I just found out this book that is about Anne Frank's diary. What is it about?
That is an old book. Where did you find it?
In the library, some kids from my class say that it was a book about a girl that survived the Holocaust and suffered a lot. My friends were saying that the Nazis treated her in inhuman conditions as if they were meant to be treated like they slept in the cold. They got beaten up and were psychologically manipulated. But Dad, I didn't understand how can this happen? Who were the Nazis? Why would they treat humans being like that? I'm so confused.
Well, they're not wrong, but let me explain what really happened. It all started
The
when.
Holocaust, founded by antisemites, was one of the biggest genocides the whole world had. It happened during the course of the Second World War, which went deeper during the years of 1933 and 1945. It was a systematic persecution that killed over 6 million Jews using inhumane forms of torture and mistreatments. Nazis started to falsely accuse Jews for causing social, economical, political, and cultural problems for the country and for the defeat in World War I. The Nazis stated that the God of the Old Testament was evil, different from the God of the New Testament, who would be the good God. With this truth, members of this sect began to see the Jews as servants of the evil God, as agents of his most works. Another origin of the Jewish version is related to the persecution of Jews against Christians and certain interpretations of St. Paul's texts. The relationship between Christians and Jews was conflictual from the beginning. But Dad, I didn't know that these Jews passed through this harmful experience. Does Anne Frank survive the Holocaust?
Well, honey, that's not quite right. Who actually survived was Otto Frank. At the age of 36, Otto Frank married Edith Hollander. The couple settled in Frankfurt, and they had two daughters, Margot Frank in 1926 and Annie Frank in 1929. The family was having a good life, even though they were worried because in 1926 the country has been hit by a hard global economic crisis that led a lot of people to die due to poverty. And then Hitler and his party took advantages of the feeling of dissatisfaction, and their supporters increased due to this crisis. In 1933, Otto and Edith Frank decided to leave Nazi Germany because of their business problems and the growing of anti-Semitism of Hitler and his followers. They had moved to the Netherlands, where Otto worked hard to get his company going and build a new life for his family. Meanwhile, the development of the Germany continued to give a cause of concern on the family. August 1944, Dutch police officers, headed by the Hoogspringfutter called Joseph, found a secret annex. Otto and others that were hiding were arrested. After a few days in prison, Otto and others were put on a train to Westberg transit camp. They ended up in prison where men and women were separated. Otto had to work during the day, but in the evening could be with Edith, Margot, and Annie. After only a few weeks in the concentration camp, Otto and the others were put on a train traveling to the east. This was the last train heading to Auschwitz concentration camp, an extermination camp. The prisoners were packed tightly in cattle wagons without enough food, with only a small barrel for a toilet. After 3 days on the train, they arrived in Auschwitz. The men and women, they were separated on a platform. It was the last time Otto would ever see his wife and children. At first, Otto was put to work outside the camp, in the grave mine. The grave was used for construction of projects. Then, he was transferred to the Kommunstabau, building roads outside the camp. Otto experienced prisoners remaining behind to be shot, but that did not happen. On January 27 of 1945, Soviet troops entered the camp. Otto felt that it was a miracle he had survived. As soon as Otto had his strength back, he wanted nothing more than to return to the Netherlands. He got on board on the Moani, a ship that was heading towards France, with hundreds of other survivors. During this long journey, he met a woman who was called Rosa de Winter, who has been in prison together with Edith Frank in Auschwitz. she told me that his wife had died in Auschwitz. From that moment on, all his hopes were pinned on Annie and Margot. But would they be still alive? The reader of Annie Frank's diary contacted Otto. Some of them kept corresponding him. Over the years, others became real friends of Otto Frank and Fritz Lee Ginger. About the letters, Otto wrote, "I often end my letters by writing. I hope that Annie's book will impact the rest of your life, so that is so far as it is possible in your own circumstances, you will work for unity and peace." Unfortunately, Otto died in 19 of August of 1980. Shortly before his death, he said on an interview, "I'm almost 90 now, and my strength is slowly fading. But the mission that Annie passed on keeps giving me new strength to fight for human rights across the world." You can see, the family suffered a lot, but Otto Frank, he was the one who made sure to keep Annie Frank's book and published. That leads to Annie Frank's real story.
6:45, the alarm went off. They were having a quiet time in the annex. There was a line to use the bathroom. After that, Annie got up and removed the blackout screens out of the windows. A risky half hour start at 8:30. The men in the warehouse started a working day while the office helpers had not arrived yet. Any noise could ruin anything due to the fact that they didn't know about the annex. At 9, they can relax. The employees start working and the noises start getting less suspicious, but they're still walking in socks. The workers get home for lunch at 12:30, so a few of the helpers came up to the secret annex to have lunch. After everything is clean, the people in the annex used to take an afternoon nap. Eddie used this time for studying or writing. At 5:30 p.m., the warehouse workers went home and someone came to see if they need anything. After all that, the people in the hiding were no longer restricted for the secret annex, and they spread out through the building. In the evening, they have dinner, always cooked by August Van Pelt and Edith Frank. Around 9 p.m., they start preparing for the night. That's basically move some furniture and get their stuff done to go to bed.
Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in the German city of Frankfurt. She had a sister, Margot, about 3 years older. The situation in Germany was not the best. There were few jobs and a lot of poverty, and in each scenario that Adolf Hitler and his party received the support of a growing number of supporters. Hitler hated the Jews, blaming them for the country's problems. With that, Anne's parents, Otto and Edith Frank, decided to move to Amsterdam. Anne immediately feels at home in the Netherlands. She learned the language, made new friends, and went to a Dutch school in the neighborhood. Her father worked hard to make the business prosper, but it was not easy. Otto also tried to set up a business in England, but he was unsuccessful. He would eventually find a solution by selling herbs and species. On September 1st, 1939, when Anne was 10 years old, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and World War II began. After a few months, on May 10, 1940, the Nazis also invaded the Netherlands. 5 days later, the Dutch army surrounded it. Gradually, but not inexorably, the occupants introduced laws and regulations that made the lives of the Jews more difficult. Parks, cinemas, and non-Jewish shops, among other places, were forbidden to Jews. Because of these restrictive rules, there were fewer and fewer places where Anne could go. Her father loses his business, since Jews are no longer allowed to have their own companies. All Jewish children, including Annie, had to go to a separate Jewish school. Jews had to start using Star of David, and rumors arose that all Jews would have to leave the Netherlands. In the spring of 1942, Anne's father then had begun to install a hidden place in the secret annex of his company. After a short time, 4 more people joined them in the secret annex. The space was very cramped, and Anne had to remain very quiet and was often afraid. For her 13th birthday, just before starts leaving the hidden place, Anne receives a diary as a gift. During those 2 days in which she remains hidden, Anne writes about what is going on in the secret annex, but also about what she feels and thinks. Writing helped her to put up with the days. When the Minister of the Education of the Dutch government in exile in England made an appeal to Radio Orange to keep diaries and war documents, Anne had the idea of rewriting the individual diaries in a single story. Anne begins to rewrite her diary, but before she could finish, she and the other people who were hiding are discovered and arrested by the German soldiers on August 4, 1944. They also arrested 2 other people who helped the family to hide. Despite the research, part of the Anne's writings were preserved. 2 other friends saved the documents before the secret annex was emptied by order of the Nazis. Passing through the intelligence service of German security police, the prison in Amsterdam and the Westerbork traffic camp, the hidden people were sent to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and extermination camp. The train trip took 3 days, which Anne and more than 1,000 other people traveled cramped in cattle wagons, where there was a little bit of food and water, and only a barrel to serve as a toilet. Upon arriving at Auschwitz, the Nazi doctors evaluated who could or could not be subjected to heavy forced labor. About 350 people who traveled with Anne were immediately killed in the gas chambers. Anne was sent to the women's work camp with her sister and mother, while her father, Otto, ended up in the men's field. In early November 1944, Anne was transported again with her sister, then she was deported to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Anne's parents were staying in Auschwitz. The conditions in Bergen-Belsen were also miserable. There were almost no food, it was cold, and Anne, like her sister, got typhoid fever. In February 1945, both died of the consequence of these diseases, first Margot and shortly after Anne. Of all those who hid in the secret annex, only Otto, Anne's father, survived the war and was released from Auschwitz by the Russians. From Anne Frank's point of view and experience during the Holocaust, we learned that you need to have faith even when the things are really bad. Learn to see the good in little things. Even the most horrible situations they went through, Anne always managed to see a little light at the end of the tunnel, even if the light was almost dimmed in the midst of all the darkness of inhumane, deplorable, and unacceptable acts.
I know what I want. I have a goal. I have opinions, a religion, and love. I'll make my voice heard. I'll go out into the world and work for mankind.